Right. So we are covering these two core topics on the syllabus, the indigenous peoples of the Americas and then the Europeans. And most of our attention will be given to the Mayans, the Tainos, and the Kalinagos. Today we're going to do the Mayans. And really questions tend to focus on the Tainos and the Kalinagos. So we're starting with the Mayans to kind of ease into things. Some questions do still come on them, right? And then so for right now, you could just listen. This is not necessarily notes that you need to take. If you're a fast writer, you're welcome to note the headings, right? As in, these are the topics for the summer. And of course, the recording will be available to you, so you could go back through it and pause wherever you need to in order to complete your notes. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Homework for today will be to revise and go back through the recording and complete notes. Now, I do think that students, everybody who is learning something, we need to have some system of taking notes. That might be handwriting the notes, or some people use a device. They use a computer and they use a Word document. And there are some people who screenshot. Now, to me, in all the time I've known students, it's really a small number of students who can screenshot and then they actually keep it organized in a way that they can go back to it and revise it. So keep that in mind. Try to make sure that you have all your notes together for when you need to revise or do a question or so. So you should take notes as complete as you can, but you could choose whether you handwrite those or you type them, right? Anyway, so we're doing these two core topics. So these are topics that everyone who studies history has to do. And then we're also going to try to cover this theme, which is where we look at something a little more in depth, which is the two core topics. We're going to look at them a little more in depth, right? The indigenous peoples and the Europeans. So we don't just want to learn about the two groups of people. We also want to learn about what happened when they met as a result. How did they impact each other? And so on, right? If anybody has another topic that they were hoping we would cover, because maybe they're going into Form 5 and they want to say it in the chat, I could keep it in mind for later on if we have time, or if there are any resources, I could share them with you, right? You could let me know. Okay, so let's get started with our discussion. And one other thing, I may not be able to answer all the questions in the chat or respond to all the comments in the chat because there may be a lot, right? But what I will do is make a note. If you ask a question, I can't get it in class this week, I will make a note of the question and try to address it next week, right? All right. All right, so I'm seeing some themes that people were hoping for in here. So I'll make a note of it and we'll see what we could do, right? All right, so let's get started. So the first thing is really just a kind of an introductory image here, right? Now I'm going to make some notes on the screen with this. If you were with Sir just now, then he would have used this as well, which is a digital pen, right? So the first thing I want to do is just make sure we understand indigenous peoples, right? Now, when I change the slide, these notes will go away. So if you need to note them, then make the note before I change the slide, right? I'll try to give you a warning before I take it away. But this is just a quick definition. There's an I here, right? I, indigenous people. So indigenous peoples refer to the people who were here first, who were in an area first. So, you know, we used to say when I was in primary school and maybe even a little bit of secondary school that Christopher Columbus discovered Trinidad or discovered the Caribbean. And then we started to say, wait a minute, he rediscovered it. And then we started to say, well, you can't really rediscover something if it was already discovered. And the reason we were saying that is because at first we didn't recognize that there were indigenous peoples, people who were here first, who were here before him, right? So for the Caribbean, those three groups, which you'll see in a later slide, are Tainos, Kalinagos, and Mayans, but also there were Aztecs and Incas, right? So really it's more, and there are other smaller civilizations, but those are the ones that CSEC focuses on, right? This map shows us that throughout the world, we actually have indigenous populations. So in America, we have what we might call Native Americans. In Australia, which we can't see on this map, we have Aboriginal peoples, right? But I don't want to take it for granted that we've all seen the word indigenous before. So indigenous means it was there first, it's there naturally. So in Trinidad, we might have some plants that are indigenous. They grew here first, and then there might be other plants that were brought to Trinidad and we try to cultivate them now, right? So what could that be? Kale is grown locally now. Mushrooms are grown locally now because people really like it, well, like in inverted commas for kale, right? But people eat a lot of it. So those are not indigenous necessarily, but maybe the orange trees we have, maybe shadow benny, some of those plants are indigenous, right? They were here first, nobody brought them. All right. I want to change the slide. Can I do that? Okay. All right, so let me clear off this and we go into the next slide, right? Okay, so sorry, I'm having a little trouble. Okay, so my cursor is stuck on the pen and it will not move to the next. So I have to figure that out and then we will continue. All right, here we go. All right, so what we have here are the objectives for the theme one. So that was actually the second thing I showed you, right? This is the more in-depth look at the indigenous peoples and Europeans, right? Oh, y'all are so nice. I'm now seeing the messages. Thanks, guys. All right. Yeah, so we're trying to look at all of these things. Describe the migratory and settlement patterns of the indigenous peoples in the Caribbean up to the arrival of the Spanish in 1492. Now, if you have a copy of the syllabus, you don't need to write this down. You could just note what it is. Or if you want to take it down in shorthand, you could do that. Or if you want to leave space and take it down when you're adding in details to your notes, you could do that. But it would be a lot of writing to try to do now, right? Unless you're a very fast writer. And it's not super important for you to keep in your mind because we will go through it as we do the details for it, right? All right, second thing, describe the social, so we will do the first one today for the Mayans. Describe the social, political, economic practices of the indigenous peoples in the Americas up to 1492. We will do this today for the Mayans, right? And next week for the Tainos and Kalinagos. Explain the relationship between the main art forms and beliefs and technology of the indigenous people. So how did what they believe shape the technology that they created? Which is a very interesting idea, that what we believe shapes the science that we develop. That's not usually how we think of science. We think of science as objective and logical. But this objective is trying to make us think about how do our beliefs influence science, right? For the Mayans anyway, and then the Chinese, the Kalinagos. So we will do that today too. Then explain the factors that led to Columbus's voyages. That's for later on. Assess the impact of the Europeans on the indigenous peoples up to 1600 later on. Assess the impact of the indigenous peoples on the Europeans up to 1600. So vice versa later on, right? All right. So I'm going to go to the next slide. If anybody needs me to wait, you'll tell me, right? You'll put it in chat. I'm watching the chat. All right. So here now, oh, sorry. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so I'll just wait a minute or two. Now, at the beginning of class, I started to show a video just as we were waiting 5 minutes to for everyone to join. So in 1 more minute, I have to move on, right? So either you could take a screenshot and continue it later on if you have to, right? Yeah, so the video wasn't super essential for teaching or for learning the objectives today. You can watch it though, it's an interesting overview of the Mayans. Right, or where will you find the video? So I will copy and paste the link into the chat towards the end of class, as well as when Sir posts the recording on the website, the link will be in the description below, right? All right, so I need to change this, that we have to move on, right? But you could always come back to this in the recording. All right, so the next things that we're looking at, so this is a little more detail for the core, and you'll notice some repetition, right? Migration of people to the Americas. So basically, where did they come from? And then when they got here, how did they interact with each other? Sorry. Right, their interactions, right? All right, next one, geographical location of the Taino, Arawak, Kalinago, Karen. So basically, where do we find them on the map? So we look at that for the Maya today. Then third thing, social, religious, political, economic organization of all three societies. So we look at that for the Maya today, right? All right, so let's go again. So this is, you'll see it's a repetition. The syllabus lists some things as core content and some things as the theme, but the theme really just takes the two pieces of the core and has us look at it in a little more depth, right? All right, so Indigenous peoples of the Americas. So now we're actually starting our lesson. So we are looking at the Mayan Society, right? So from this point on, this is where you would need to take notes, right? Because now we're actually getting into the information. Before that, we were looking at basically what we have to study. Now we're actually getting the information. Now I have put a time period here, 900 BC, or sometimes you might see BCE, sorry, before current era. So actually, let me use the all right, guys, technical difficulties. You know how humanities teachers are with technology. Going back. Right, so sometimes you might see, let me move this back over here because I am left-handed, so I need that. All right. Yeah, so sometimes you might see, instead of BC, you might see BCE, right? So BC is the old-fashioned way, and it would say it meant before Christ and AD meant after, right? And then sometimes, no, we say before current era, and ACE for after. Oh, no, wait, sorry. current era, CE, right? So you could also see those different things. If you need to ask a question, you'll have to put it in the chat, right? All right, and then the other thing that I would point out, just until everybody knows everybody, and we know that there aren't any people who will make hurtful remarks or comments or trolls who slipped into the class, right? Because they have nothing better to do on a Monday morning, right? You will note that I've put 900 BC to 900 AD, but some, different texts that you look at will, sure, I'll go back over the BCE and the AD. Right, let me clear the screen and I'll say it again. Different texts that you look at will give you different numbers here. So some might say 700 BCE and some might go to 600 or 700 AD or 900 AD. You'll see slightly different dates. You're probably not going to be tested on that, right? Okay, so to give you another point of reference, right now we are in 2022 AD, right? And AD is actually a Latin term, and I can't remember exactly what it means right now. But what used to be the marker was, because most of the world is Christian, the death of Christ, Anno Domini. Okay, thank you, Kelsey. Right, Anno Domini, right? So it used to be the BC stood for before Christ, and then the AD was for after his birth or after his death or something. So that's just to give you. So it would go to the middle would be 0, and then you would start counting backwards. So you'd get 100 BC or 200 BC and 900 BC. So it's like a number line, right? All right, yeah. 80 is for after his death, right? Okay, so but what I wanted to say is that sometimes in a question, you might see BCE instead of BC, and you might see CE, and this is before current era meaning time period, and this one is current era again meaning time period, right? So if you are reading in a textbook or you're reading online, you might see this, right? All right. Okay, so I'm getting some questions in the chat. I'll respond to them in a bit. Okay, so I want to move on from this point, right? So we're going to go to the next slide. And all of this to also say that even though we have 900 to 900 here, Mayan civilization started developing before and it continued after, right? It's not a clear cutoff point. It's not like the world ended in 900 AD and so on, right? All right. Okay. All right, so the first thing we said we wanted to talk about was how people got to the New World. Now the map, it's as though you're standing at the North Pole with Santa Claus and looking down at the continents, right? So this is important. Let's make sure we understand it. Where the original peoples came from, they came this way. So they came, right now, there's a space between, there's water, right? Between North America, Alaska over here, and over here, which is what, Russia. So the two continents don't connect, right? But thousands of years ago, so you'll see it at the bottom, right? Thousands of years ago. People, so ice would have connected these two continents, right? And we would have gotten what we call the Bering Straits. So you all may have heard this term before. Look, I'm writing it on top. So now a strait is usually a body of water between, a narrow body of water between two land masses, right? But this area was frozen. So because it was frozen, it allowed people to walk across. So just as the arrows are showing, People are walking across here and they're going, so here I am in North America. This is North America, right? North America. So they go there and then they continue walking and you'll see they get through there, they're walking and they get to Central America. So this is really where the Maya will end up, the Yucatan Peninsula, which we will look at again. And here is South America. They will keep going, right? This is Latin America or South America, right? And then when they get here, some of them will actually come back up and the island. So Trinidad should be over here somewhere because you can see Venezuela sticking out, right? But Trinidad is not on the map because maybe we're too small to fit on this map. And then you can see Cuba and Jamaica and the other islands, and this is Florida here, right? So what we want to remember is that where did they come from? Well, during the last ice age, they walked across the continents because there was a bridge connecting both land masses, and they went down through what we call North America to Central America, right? Any questions about that? Anybody want me to repeat anything there? I've lost my, oh, right, I can't see the cursor. Right? All right, so most of you may have heard this story already, right? All right, so how do people get into, I'm gonna go to another slide where it's written out and you can see it, right? Right, so here you have it in the slide. Where did the Mayan come from? They were originally people who crossed from Asia during the last ice age, right? So we can make a note of this. You could go ahead and note this. So where did they come from? And this will be the same for the Maya, the Tainos, the Kalinagos, right? They originally are people who crossed from Asia during the last ice age. So you could go ahead and make that note. And you could note everything on this side. You could summarize it or you could screenshot it. It's up to you. And then we'll go back and look at the maps again, right? So during the last ice age, there was a solid landmass that connected Asia to America. Asia is in the continent, not India. Don't picture India in your head. There's a different part of the map, right? But the whole continent, it connected both of them. So people just, what did we do? We walked across, right? Why did they walk across? Well, the way that they survived was through hunting. So when the animals that they hunted walked across, because they were following food sources, the animals themselves are looking for food, and so they follow the area. They go to the area where they could get food to forage, right? And people follow these herds. So when they were traveling, so I'm wonder now what were their reasons for emigrating. So they're following the herds of animals that they hunted. When they were traveling, they have to travel in small groups. They cannot travel in too large a number. If they go in too large a number, then they will kill too many animals and the herd itself will die and their food source in general will be jeopardized, right? So now they understood this. It seems like sometimes we people in 2022 don't understand that, but they understood this back then. So they were hunters following their food source. They traveled in small groups to try and maintain the numbers and keep the herd healthy so that they could keep feeding off of it, right? So we want to make sure we know the points from this side. So I'm going to mute myself and give us a few minutes, like 3 minutes to make the notes. Then we're going to go back to the maps and look at them a little bit again, right? And in the meantime, I'll also check the questions in the chat, right? So if you have a question that you need answered, you can put it in the chat and I'll be checking that now, right? So let's just take 3 minutes to note what is on the slide. Okay, guys. I would like to just go back over the whole thing again because I'm getting some good questions in the chat. Now, the thing is that could be confusing is that there are different ways that teachers and textbooks also refer to where the original peoples came from, right? But we want to, okay, so sorry, I was distracted by a question. Are we going until half one? Yes, we could consider taking a break at 12:30, a 5-minute break. If you all want one, you could ask me, or we could finish a little bit early, right? If we finish everything we have to do, we will finish early. We will stop early, right? But as you all would know, as history students, history is a lot of information. So I don't want us to fall behind on the first day, right? But you could tell me at around 12:30 if you all want to take a break and we'll find a place to stop. Okay, let me go back over where they came from, right? Can I change the slide or is anybody still writing from it? Yes, I could change it, right? All right, okay, so let me go back to the map. Okay, so that's other ideas. What is this? Right. Okay, so here is our map, right? Right now, this area to my left, to the left of the screen, and this area to the right of the screen, they are not connected. So the area to the right is North America, and above it, Canada, right? And it looks different too, because long ago, there were no nations per se, so there are no national boundaries here. So we might get a little confused that way too, right? And on the left-hand side is where we might call, so this is India here, right? This is India. But we refer to the whole continent as Asia, right? And up here we have places like Russia, and we have Siberia, right? So sometimes we say that, okay, and in between the two, we have, so right now this is water, right? Today this is water, right? And we would call this a strait. In geography, a strait is a narrow body of water between two land masses, right? And the strait is spelled S-T-R-A-I-T. So this particular strait is called the Bering Straits. Right? So while right now there's water between these two continents, Canada, North America, and then over here, Asia, Russia. Back then, 20,000 years ago, we were in an ice age, the world was. So this whole area was frozen. So we say there was a land bridge, a bridge made out of land, right? So people were able to walk across it. So people who were living here, as the animals they ate migrated, they also migrated with the animals and went across, right? So some of them would have stopped in North America and they would have formed civilizations that now we refer to as Native American civilizations. Some of them would have stopped here and they would have formed the Aztecs. Some of them would have gone to Yucatan Peninsula, they would have formed the Mayans. Some of them would have gone lower along this coast here, and they would have been the Aztecs. Not the Aztecs, sorry, the Inca, right? Some of them would have gone across to the Caribbean. They might have gone through Florida. Now we think some went through Florida, some went from Central America, and some went up again through South America into the Caribbean. And they are the Tainos and the Kalinagos, right? Or who we used to call Caribs and Arawaks, right? So is anybody still confused about the concept of how people came across to Central and South America and the Caribbean? If so, you could let me know, right? So some of you, before when you did it in school, you might have been told Siberia, you might have been told Asia, you might have been told Bering Strait, you might have been told Russia as to how people got across the continent. It's the same thing. It's the same general landmass, right? But the Bering Strait refers to this area here. All right, so I'm just gonna check the chat to see if we still have a question. Any question about? All right. Okay, so the Bering Strait. Now look at the spelling there. Let me put it in the chat so it's clear, because I know my handwriting with a digital pen might not be the best. Because you might want to look it up later if you forget. And if you see it again, you want to remember what it is, right? So yes, it is the body of water between the two land masses, between two continents. But we say that they crossed the Bering Strait because at the time it was a solid piece of ice. Or there was a solid piece of ice connecting the two land masses. All right, so there's a question in the chat about who's the most violent people of the group. You know, I cannot say. History books used to represent the they used to say the Kalinagos were the most violent, but now I think they're a little more cautious about that. I think every culture had kind of its warrior class and its fighters and so on. All right, so I'm gonna clear the screen and we're gonna look at the maps now, right? All right. We will next week at the start of class, I would like to have a quiz. I'll do it like a Zoom poll, right? Obviously, I'm not going to report to your parents if you, because there are a lot of you. But if you are serious about the subject and you're serious about the effort that you put in, which you should be, you know, just revise and try to do the best that you can, right? All right, so let's continue. Okay. So here is a map. Now, this is a question that you could get for CSEC, right? They could show you areas and they could ask you which civilization was there. Or they may ask you to name some of the countries where the civilization occupied, right? So for us, we are looking at the Maya. And so this larger area here is Mexico, and then also Guatemala, right? And if I'm not mistaken, some of the civilization was also in Honduras. Yeah, the quiz will be on what we're doing today. Were some of the indigenous peoples cannibals? I like how these questions seem to be coming from boys about the violence and the cannibalism. It's not quite as graphic as it's not like they roasted a body and ate it on a spit. It's more like I think there was some ceremonial ritualistic practices, but yeah, there was, I guess, some cannibalism, but it's not like human flesh was a major component of their diet. All right. Okay, so right, so for right now, we're just looking at the images, getting a sense of where everybody was, and we will get a note on this later on, right? So let's go then to the next map. All right, so here you could see it's a little blurry, but you could see how the Mayan civilization was kind of spread out. And so you could see Mexico is the major area that they were in. And then Guatemala, right, was another. And you could also see that the civilization was large from this, right? I remember when I learned about the Mayan civilization, the teacher was emphasizing that of the three, the Mayan were the least spectacular, is to say. So, you know, the Aztec, the Inca, they were strong civilization, the Mayan were just kind of weaker. But when you actually take the time to look at Mayan civilization, it's pretty large, and they did achieve quite a lot, right? All right, so this is just to give us an idea of how widespread the civilization was, all right? And we can note, you could probably make a note of a few of the places. So you have some examples of names of civilizations. So a very popular one is this one here, Chichen Itza, right? So the spelling is Chichen, and on the E, there's a little accent going up. And then it's a Itza, and on the A, there's a little accent going up. All right. Tikal was another popular one, Tikal, right? Tulum, Tulum, right? Uxmal, Uxmal. So you could just put as some examples if you're answering a question, you might, and you want to explain that they were widespread, you know, you have that option. Now, I have seen past paper questions where they give you a map and they ask you to say, not the names of the civilizations, not these little names of the cities, but like who lived here. So you might say Mayan, or you might say Inca, or you might say Aztec, dependent, right? And if you were watching the video, you might have heard that people would have settled on the coast first, right? And then they would have moved inward. Now, some of y'all do geography. What is this different coloration here that you see in this? What does this mean? What is the map trying to show us in these areas with this kind of red, kind of bumpy graphic? What's that about? Right, it's a mountainous region. Good. So they settled on the coast first, then they moved to the lowlands, and then they moved to the mountains, right? And the fact that they were able to build civilization in mountains is pretty impressive, because it's hard to build houses on a mountain and not have them wash away, let alone the pyramids and so on that they built, right? All right, so we're going again. Let's look at our next slide. All right, so we talked about where they came from. We talked about why they emigrated. Now we're going to get into where they settled, but we looked in broad terms at where they settled. All right, we went through that slide. All right, so now we're going into more detail on where the Mayans settled and why they settled there, right? All right, so the main area that they settled in is what we know today as Mexico. So this you could note, right? So now we're getting into the note-taking section of our presentation, right? So they settled in what we know as Mexico. And they settled in the area of Mexico that we refer to as the Yucatan Peninsula, right? So these states, Yucatan, Campeche, Tabasco, these are areas in Mexico today. Okay, so if you are asked to name areas where Mayan people settled, you can name those, right? And as we just said, they started first on the coast. So they went from the coastal, the wall was not there, and the wall is still not there. The wall is just a dream, right? They started on the coast, and then they moved to like the Midlands, the grassy plains, and then they moved to the highlands, right? The mountains and so. Okay, they also evolved further. First, they were villages. So think of a village, you know, Maracas village, that's where I grew up. It's pretty rural, not a lot of development, no skyscrapers. They built their pyramids, right? Then chiefdom, so you might have one person recognized as the head, and then gradually people started to evolve into states. Now, when you get to the point of states, that means you have to have a government, so you have to have leaders, and you have to have things like law, so you become more organized, right? If you live in a village and you teach your neighbor mango, you might get away with it, right? But if you live in a city and you steal the neighbor's car, you'll be in some trouble, right? So as we go from village to state, we develop more our legal apparatus, our political system, and that's what we want to look at. But we want to understand it didn't just happen. It's not like they came down following these herds of buffalo from Siberia, North America, and then they landed up in a country. No. First they settled, and then they gradually, right, there was a process. That's a very good way to say it, Anjana. All right. Now, what is it that made the process start to happen? Well, the main thing is the food. They were able to depend on farming to get their source of food. So they didn't have to follow herds of animals anymore. And they didn't have to necessarily gather food anymore, right? Because hunter-gathering societies, that's probably what they were along the way, right? So the fact that they were now able to farm meant that they could create a permanent settlement, because you could depend on creating your own food source. Right? So they were able to create permanent settlements as a result of their success in farming. The main thing that they could farm was corn or maize. Another word that we often see to refer to corn is maize, right? But also things like tomatoes, squash, chilies, chocolate. Now, not all parts of the empire would have farmed this or these things. All of them might have had corn. But let's take chocolate, for example. Not all states in the Mayan, now I'm saying empires, let me not say that word again. Not all states in the Mayan civilization would have had all of these foods, right? So then that meant that the next, yes, cocoa. Cocoa is where the chocolate would have come from, right? So then that meant that they could trade with each other. And so they're farming, so they could depend on their food source. Then they get surplus. They get a surplus. So we grow corn. We don't need all this corn. Let's sell some, or let's trade some. And in exchange, we will get some chocolate from this other part of the empire, civilization, rather. Food and livestock as money. Well, they didn't necessarily have a currency. For sure, they didn't have a currency, right? But some things were more valued than others. And this is detailed in the slide on economy. So you'll get to write it on them, but I'll just tell you. Things like obsidian, you'll know what obsidian is. It's this kind of gemstone. It's not exactly a gemstone, actually. It's material made from, it's like a black glass like material. Okay, yes, a crystal from volcanic eruptions. That was really prized, as were things like gold and copper, and in some places salt, because remember, most of the empire is no longer on the coast, so you can't get salt from inland. You have to get it from the coastal areas, from the sea. Chocolate was prized, so they did trade a surplus of whatever they had, right? All right, so surplus farming, they could trade, and then if they could trade, they could also create different jobs. Oh, sorry. Let me just go back here. All right, are we finished with this slide? Can I go ahead and change again? All right, so let's go to the next one. Remember that if you can't get through the entire slide, this is for an activity, we'll come back to that. Then you could listen to the recording. right? And get it done. All right, so this slide on social organization, let's try and get it there. And then get through this, and then we will take a short break, right? All right, so I am sorry if there are people who are still not finished. I'm going by, if I get mostly yeses, I'll change, and if I get mostly no's, I'll wait, right? If we have time at the end, I can go back to it for you if we finish early, because I am trying to push a little bit to make sure we finish the topic a little, right? All right, so we are talking about how the society was organized now, right? So you can shorten these notes to suit, but there will be points coming down to fill up the rest of the white space, right? Okay, so they built temple cities. So the cities were centered in a way around a temple, right? In some cases, 3. So the pyramids that you're familiar with seeing, we have pictures later on. That is because those pyramids, at the top of them, there's a temple, right? Okay, so they would build a city, often would be 3 pyramids with temples at the top, and then a courtyard, because the 3 would create a space. And then the other side, so picture a square now, right? And the 3 pyramids are sides of the square, and in the middle is an open space, which is a courtyard. And then the other side would be places for public meetings, right? Okay, so they built temple cities, so their religion was very important to them, right? Now, they did not have a central empire. So every time I mistakenly say Mayan Empire, feel free to correct me. What I need to be saying, and what we all need to be saying, is Mayan civilization, right? And because empire implies single leader, but they didn't have a single leader. They had city-states, and in each city-state, there's a king. So let's think of the US, because we are clear that the US has different states, right? Florida is a state, New York is a state. So imagine each of those has their own king, or their own president, or their own prime minister. And that is what the Mayan Empire was like. Sorry, again, Mayan civilization was like. Now, that didn't mean that some states didn't try to boss around other states, right? So it is possible that a stronger state, or a state with a stronger military, or a stronger leader might ask the other smaller state for tribute, right? It might ask them to bring some of their farming, some of whatever they farmed, or some of whatever they produced, or a certain amount of gold or whatever to them, right? That could happen. As well as there could be alliances. And then as well, somebody asked earlier who the most violent people were. There could be fights. Yes, Akila, they did have arguments. And they did sometimes invade each other, and they did take prisoners and spoils of war and all those other things. All right. All right. So the society, the Mayan society, has a clear structure. It's not everyone is equal, we're all happy, let's all be friends, right? No. We have nobles, and within the nobles, the most noble of the nobles would be the leader, who's the king, and he's also seen as divine. He's also seen as defeated from, not defeated, sorry, descended from a god. Did they gang up on each other to defeat each other? Possibly, that could have happened, yeah. We're not going to look in such detail at if anyone did that, but yes. Right, so we have the king at the top, and we have nobles, we have priests. So we have priests are very important, and they are seen as part of the elite as well, right? Then we have commoners. So I think, did I put it? I'm sure I put it right. So here we go. We could look in a little more detail. Oh, no, the rest is coming. That's all right. All right, so by nobles elites, so they are the people who can read and write. They are the richest ones, surprise. They are the class and occupation in Mayan society is hereditary, you inherit it. So if your parents are noble, then you are born a noble. If your parents are priests, if your father's a priest and you are a boy, then you become a priest, right? the nobles and the elites, their occupation, their job is they have to collect tribute. Who gets the tribute? The king, right? And maybe he might share it with the nobles. There's also the military, right? So the military leadership is considered a noble or elite profession. So high priests, and their job, you know, is to take care of the state, make sure the state is run properly. Sorry. The slide just changed and I'm not sure. Okay. Well, I changed the slide accidentally. Sorry. Let me just go back here. Right. Right. So people who are the administrators in the city, people who manage their plantations, people who lead trade. So not the commoner going to market to sell what he grew, but the people who maybe own a plantation, or the people who manage a group of plantations, they are the nobles and elites. All right, so some interesting questions in the chat. What if the priest had a daughter? What would she be? Well, she would be noble and elite and would probably have a good marriage. She would get good marriage prospects, but she could not become a priest. Yeah, the words at the bottom. Okay, let me see if I could fix that. Okay, yeah. Is that a little clearer? Okay. All right. So commoners now, the leaders of Mayan states were usually met, but there are some historical references to queens, right? Could they get a promotion in positions? This is a very good question. So in general, no. In general, they could not. The only exception is through military service. They might be elevated somewhat, right? Did they have rules of war? Not really. If no boy child was born, who would replace the priest king when the time comes? Right. So there are some, there have been queens. There have been a few queens. Another male relative, but there have been a few queens. But then sometimes too, there'll be a queen for a few years, and then when she has a son, the son is declared king at a certain age, even if she rules in place for him until he's older, right? Or I guess through marriage, possibly, if a princess marries somebody of another king level status, that person might become leader. Okay. All right. Okay. Then we have commoners, right? So the commoners are the people who are farmers, laborers, servants, artisans, merchants. So they have farms. They also work as labor on the farms. They could be servants. Artisans are people who might create these paintings or create pottery or any other art, create clothing, create other objects. Merchants are people who buy and sell things as well. So commoners were barred from wearing certain types of, yes, we will take a break as soon as we're done with this slide. We're almost there, right? Commoners were barred from wearing certain clothing or symbols. Yes, lower down we get into slaves, right? If you look down the bottom, you'll see the part about slaves. As we said before, it's through the military that if there was any opportunity to rise, one had it, right? Now commoners also didn't live in the city because a Mayan civilization is expansive. It's not just the area that I described before with the 3 temples and the courtyard and the public rooms, right? That is the city itself. Outside of that area, people would have farms, there would be villages. It's a wide area that's developed for a Mayan state, right? Okay, and then the other class is serfs and slaves. So serfs are like peasants. They're not exactly slaves, but they're doing hard work for not a lot of money. In a few minutes, let's just talk through this point and we'll take a 5-minute break, right? So serfs could work for rulers or people who are nobles or even a commoner who owned a piece of land and they didn't, right? Now, slaves. So slaves could be owned by both nobles and commoners. They were, so POWs means prisoners of war, right? They were also unwanted orphans. If there was a child somebody gave up, they might become a slave. They might also be criminals. So people who committed criminal offenses could be punished by a period of enslavement, right? In terms of advancing their status, slaves, no. If a man or woman married a slave, then they took the status of the slave, right? They too took on that status. And the way to advance that is clear that it could happen is really through the military, right? But it wasn't a meritocracy. It was, you were born into a position and you stayed there, right? All right, so let us take a break now for 5 minutes. I will leave this slide up in case anybody is ranking. So as serfs normal, then okay, so if a noble marries a slave, the noble takes the status of the slave. As serfs normal people, as in like peasants, serfs are like peasants, meaning that they're free, but they're in need of employment because they don't own land or so on, right? All right, so the recording will be accessed on the school's website. I'll go over that towards the end of class. Okay, so I have to mute myself for a minute to drink some water here. I'm leaving this slide up for anyone who wants to continue taking notes. And in, 4 minutes now, we will start back our discussion, right? Okay, guys, if you're writing down, we have, I think, 1 more minute for the break, and then I'm just gonna go back to a slide for a student. Where did they settle and why? And then we'll move forward again, right? So just so you could know if to wrap up the point and how much space to leave. So 1 more minute for a break, and then we will continue. All right, so I'm going to go back to the where did they settle and why. Right. All right. In terms of where you could find the recording, you'll go to the school's website at iLoveLessons.com. And under summer recordings, you should be able to find it, but it won't be available until tomorrow, right? So still needs about 24 hours to just organize the link, convert it to a YouTube video and upload it and so on. All right, so I think that we could probably move on. All right, so I'm getting yes, I will put this in the chat. Actually, let me put it now. I'm getting a question about the textbook that I use. That's a great question. I use several textbooks and some appropriate websites. Okay, so go back to the slide, the Indigenous Peoples of Americas. Which slide? I'm not sure. Is this an earlier slide? Is that a map? Before the map. Before this? This one? This one? This one. Okay. All right. All right. So the most that I could give you time for is for a screenshot, right? All right, and these are points from the syllabus, the history syllabus. Okay, so the website is www, and I'll write it again towards the end, iLoveLessons.com, right? And no, you have to be careful. Remember, Trinidadians, it's lessons. So you have to make sure you put in that last S. It's not I love lesson, right? A lot of people leave it out. Right, and it will be under summer recordings. Okay, great. So the site, yeah, the YouTube channel also gives you the site. All right, so let's move on. So we did social. And okay, I feel somebody just asked me a question and didn't respond to it. But I meant to. What was the question? Oh, right, the textbook. Yes. So a combination of textbooks, but also different websites that, so not .com websites, but like .edu websites and so on, right? The reason is that when I look at the past paper questions and I look at the information in textbooks, the textbooks are often a little too thin in what they provide for to answer past paper questions. They just don't give enough detail for what CXC is asking. Now, I don't know if that's just because I haven't found the right textbook. I don't know. If y'all have a great textbook, you could tell me and I'll check it out. But that has been my experience with history textbooks. It's very general. It's not structured in a way that would help us answer the questions. It's written like a story, a not very interesting story. Because it doesn't talk about all the cool things y'all have asked about, like violence and human sacrifice and cannibalism. It talks about gender roles. Speaking of which, yeah, now we've come to gender roles in Mayan society. So as you all have probably realized, there's a difference between what women do, what women can access in society. For instance, they can't be priests, and they very rarely became leaders of the state, right? And what men do, right? And that continues on if we look at other things. So generally, women had domestic roles. That meant that they made food, they raised children, they supported the men in the family. The men were going out to work, to farm, to trade, whatever. They helped along those lines, right? Rituals were very important. So they might prepare items for rituals. Think about what families do before they have a prayers, or Thanksgiving service, or before a religious holiday like Christmas or Eid or Diwali, right? And you prepare items for those things. So, and who takes the lead in that? In many homes, it's the woman, it's the wife, the mom, right? Or the sisters. So, Mayan society, women prepared items for rituals. They might make craft items as well, right? But their roles are really domestic. Caribbean history for CSEC by Balducing. I think that might be one of them. And there's another one that I use by, the one that I like the most is by, it's a woman, I can't remember her name right now, but it's a Jamaican writer, but I can't remember her name right now. And then there's another one, Foundations, that's book 1 and 2. That is probably my least favorite. Okay, so Kadisha, good question. We will get to that in the religion side. Who did the indigenous people pray to before Christianity? They had a whole number of gods. The Mayan did anyway, right? Okay, so let's just continue through this, right? So, okay, royal power could be passed on through princesses. So if the king has a daughter, she may not necessarily go on to become queen. She could if there's no son available, or if something else happens and she has to step into the role. But she could, she does have the power to pass on the line to divinity. So her children, you know, will be considered divine because her father was a king and he was considered divine. Whomever she marries, you know, she will carry that standing with her. Okay, part of, right, bloodletting. Okay, so part of one of the main elements of religious rituals in Mayan culture and Aztec is bloodletting. So I guess cutting oneself and giving up some blood for a sacrifice, right? Or in the service of a god. So they really believe that by giving up some of your blood, you were giving up some strength, some of your life force. So you might be giving it to a god as part of worship. So women were allowed to participate in some of the highest levels of rituals. No, that's not all, I think. Right, this is all now, right? Yeah, whoops. Right. Okay. Humans, it's not exactly the same thing as human sacrifices. Human sacrifices were a part of religious traditions. The Mayans practiced animal sacrifice at first, but then they moved on to human sacrifice, right? So bloodletting is not the same as human sacrifice. It is, anybody used to watch Vikings? Some of you, I'm sure, watched Vikings. And you would have seen them do rituals involving human blood, right? Now, I'm not encouraging you to go watch it if you didn't watch it. I'm just using that as a point of reference. Because you would have seen it in some form already. You just may not have called it bloodletting. All right, point 4. So there have been some Mayan queens in history, as we've been saying, but they are really in a minority. In general, women did not have the same standing as men. They could influence political decisions by, depending on where they are in the social hierarchy, speaking to whomever they are on equal footing with. So if they were married to a king, or if they were a princess, they might influence the king's decision. If they were in the noble class or the elites, they might talk things over with the council that the king worked with, or they might talk things over with other political leaders. All right, who were the type of people they would sacrifice? Well, so sometimes slaves, they might sacrifice slaves. Any unwanted children that were abandoned, any orphans that were given up, they might also be sacrificed. This is not a pleasant part of Mayan culture. Yes, that is quite cruel. Could commoners become royalty? So a lot of Mayan history is not 100% clear, because people have pieced together things from what they could find, because the Spanish destroyed a lot of the written texts of the Mayan. So based on what they found, they think not. So they think not that people could become royalty through marriage, right? All right. Sorry, we just had a few more points to discuss here. So in general, men were the leaders, right? They also did the majority of manual labor. Women might participate in agriculture. They would sow and they would harvest. Do we know what sowing is? SOWING. In the context of agriculture. Yeah, so think about the process of farming. Yes, it's the planting part. So the till digs up rows of earth, and then sowing is you go and you throw in the seeds and you cover it up. Right? All right. Next point here, last point here actually. Oh, sorry, this point is incomplete. This number 8 here is incomplete. They often were the ones identified to take the positions of their fathers. I think piece of it got cut off. This is really the priests. Right? So in oh wait, no, sorry. Sons were often the ones identified to take the position of their fathers. So remember we said that jobs and positions are inherited, right? So this day here is sons. So if somebody is a priest, so priests were not celibate, meaning they had relationships with women. If they had a son, then the son had the option to become a priest most times, right? And sons were often the ones, men were often the ones identified to take the positions of a father. So if the father is a merchant, then his son could become a merchant too. If the father is an elite member of a council that advises the king, then the son could be groomed into that position too, not his daughter, right? All right, any questions about this? Could the son of a priest become a warrior? I would probably make a good movie, but it is unlikely. Given what is known about Mayan civilization, it is most likely that sons of the military went on to serve in the military, and sons of priests went on to serve in the priesthood. Yes, positions in the society are hereditary. What happens if they do not do the sacrifice? Well, what did the Mayans believe would happen, or what do we think would happen? So the Mayans would probably believe that something bad would happen if they didn't do a necessary sacrifice. as in the crops might fail, the civilization might fall, you know, something bad would happen. As to whether or not we believe that. Well, do you believe that? If you don't perform a particular ritual, that something bad might happen? Yeah, people didn't choose, we have to understand this, right? People didn't choose their jobs in Mayan societies. People inherited the position that their family had. Yes, so the last slide here gives some links, and I'll put them in the chat here, as well as if you go to the video, they will be in the description below, right? All right, so I want to go ahead and change slides now. So if you need to screenshot anything because you didn't finish it, go ahead. I'm sure that some Mayans were willing to sacrifice. Again, this is not a clear thing that is stated by scholars. You're asking questions, a lot of questions that research cannot answer. What would happen if the people didn't do their parents' job? Well, they might become outcasts, or maybe they might survive and be okay, or maybe that never happened. Maybe everybody wants to do their parents' job. That's probably unlikely. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so economy and trade. So how did the Mayans make money? Well, the first way that they made money was through farming, through agriculture. And this is what they grew, right? They grew cassava, which is also called manioc. They grew squash. There shouldn't be a second slash here. You'll take that out, right? They grew beans, they grew corn, and we said corn was maize. Did they have pets? They had small dogs, and I'm not sure how much of that was domesticated and or food source. Now look, as we're looking at the picture, yeah, all they did was barter, really, because they didn't have money, they didn't have currency. So the way they got goods was through trade. You'll see canals, you could say. So their system of irrigation was really impressive to the Spanish. And then another thing that they had was raised beds to grow crops on, sort of like how hydroponics grows crops out of water, but because there was swampy land in some areas where they settled. So they would put the bed that they were growing, the soil bed that they were growing things on. So they would have like a platform over the swampy area, and they would grow things on top of the platform, and they could get nutrients from the water, but not get bogged down by the swamp, right? Anyhow, so the economy is based on these things. Then thanks to all of their innovations to deal with the mountains that we saw earlier, the swampy areas, the forests, they're able to grow a surplus, right? So these innovations are things like how they water the crops to irrigation, terracing. I'm sure some of you all have met terracing before. Raised bed farming. So they build a bed over the swampy area. They create a soil bed over the swampy area. And slash and burn. So cutting down trees, burning an area to clear it. And then also leaving the area fallow, just leaving it without growing anything for a few years to let it replenish itself, right? All right, so terracing, let's say we have a mountain, because we know they lived on mountains, right? And you need to grow crops. But if I grow a crop here, when the rain falls, it will just wash everything away, and everything will fall down the hill, and I will be sad, right? All right. So what I could do is I could put a terrace in the mountain. So what I will do is I will dig in, like I will dig here. I will clear off that area, and I will dig here. So it's like I'm creating steps, right? And then I will plant. Right? And I'll follow the contour of the mountain. So I'll go around doing that. So it will discourage everything from rolling down the side of the mountain. Right? My crops will survive, my topsoil will not wash away all of these things. So I will have created a terrace on the mountain. Christian, I'm seeing your question. And is this in relation to me saying that there are some things that we cannot answer? I'm wondering. So Christian's question is whether or not the history of being taught is not 100% accurate. The truth is, if you look back at how history was taught even 20, 30 years ago, and you realize that some things are taught differently now, yeah, history is not 100% accurate. Just like science is not 100% accurate. It evolves, we learn new things, and we do things differently, right? But one thing that did happen in Mayan history is when the Spanish came to Mayan civilization, the Mayans had a system of writing. It's not that history is always changes, it's that we are always learning new things and gaining new perspectives, right? But anyway, the Spaniards came, the Mayans had a system of writing. They had a lot of books, they had a lot of written things, and the Spaniards was like, no. The Spaniards were like, no, we can't have this. We are here to conquer you, and you are here to mine gold for us, and you don't know the true God, and all of this is about gods that are not real, and let us burn everything. Right? And they destroyed a lot of the text that the Mayan had written. Right? And so because they destroyed all of the text that the Mayans had written, most of that, there's like one popular one that survived, the Popol Vuh, right? Because they destroyed all of the texts, people have had to piece together things from archaeology and remains and so on. So some things are suggested in history. So for example, it's been suggested that women could become queen in some situations, but it's unclear how much power they actually had, right? All right, so this was a terrace. Let me just explain raised beds. So I'm going to get rid of my fabulous mountain here. Right? Okay, so this is a swampy land. This is supposed to be swamp. So picture a swamp in your head. Right? Swamp, right? It is, you step in it, your feet sink down. If you try to plant tomatoes, it probably won't grow straight. It will have nothing to be supported on or whatever. But the area is probably very nutrient rich, right? So as a farmer, what I will do is I will create like a platform and I will let it hover over the swamp bed. Right? So the roots might grow and they might get some nutrients from the swamp. I probably have my platform a little high in my drawing, right? And then the plants will grow and be happy. So they will get the nutrients from the moisture and from the earth, the mud that is in the swamp. But they're not really growing in the swamp itself. They're growing on this bed of soil that I've put above the swamp, right? All right. Were the Mayans being paid to do their jobs? The only people really receiving tributes were the nobles, the king, right? Not even all of the officials. Some of the officials might have been supported by the city or the village that they oversaw, but that doesn't mean tribute. Exactly. So they would have had a salary, sorry, in some way, but not exactly money, right? All right. So let's keep going. I'm getting some questions about what is the ethnicity of the Mayans. I don't have a clear answer for you right now, but I could come back to that next week. I'll make a note and come back to it next week. All right. Okay, so irrigation, terracing, raised bed farming, slash and burn. Now they did a lot of trade, and there were a lot of roadways that scholars have found, excavators have found routes, right? For people to pass who were going to trade, right? Now the way that they would have traveled is like with a caravan. So they would load up their goods and they would travel and come back. What materials were their clothes made from? So this is an interesting question that touches on what we're supposed to do for technology. They're made from cotton. They wove their own clothes. They had a loom and they made cloth and they made clothes from it. All right, so they traded for things like food. So they traded for basic items. So there's two layers of this trade, right? So subsistent items, so food, tools, clothing. They traded for luxury items. So jade, quetzal feathers. So somebody's asking if they want animal skin. They're not depicted a lot as wearing animal skin, but you do see this quetzal feathers. Sorry, these really elaborate, brightly colored blue-green feathers a lot in their costumes and for rituals as well as in clothing. So this comes from a bird, sorry. So the feathers, yes, but animal skin, not so much. They wore full clothes. Well, it varies. It depends on what they were doing and who the person was and what level in society they were. So, okay, I'll make a note and we'll come back to this question about clothing, right? All right, so we were talking about trade. They did 2 levels of trade. So for basic things, food, tools, clothing, those are things you need to survive. And then they also traded for luxury items. So things that they wanted, that the rich people wanted. So jade, which is a type of precious, semi-precious stone, the quetzal feathers that we talked about, gold, copper, things they would need for rituals, pottery, decorated pottery. All right, I have this items for rituals twice. So sorry about that. All right, they didn't have currency. There was a preference for gold, obsidian, salt. And like salt would be more valuable inland as opposed to for trade with coastal people because well they have ready access to it, right? The reason people know about the obsidian is because when they excavate Mayan civilizations, they could find obsidian all along the trade routes, like little pieces of it. So they could tell, oh, this was valuable. People used it a lot for trade, but they didn't have a currency per se, right? All right, so I'm moving to the next slide, which is religious organization. Now you could see here a picture of a ruin, but it gives you an idea of what the city might have looked like, right? And every city is different a little. It has the same general layout, but some might have more than 3 temples, some might have more decoration in some places and so on. So you see a temple here, which looks like a pyramid, and there's the temple at the top. You see one over here, one here as well. And then this side that's missing, cut off in the picture, might be where the rooms would have been, the public meeting rooms. And the middle part will be the courtyard. Okay, so we discussed this thing at the top already, that they built temple cities with a courtyard and pyramids surrounding it. Now let's talk a little bit about their religious beliefs. So they had very complicated religious beliefs, and these religious beliefs were tied up with their daily life and how they organize their society. We say that they are polytheistic. So this is an important word. right? Let's make sure that we note it, right? Polytheistic. They believed in many gods, is what polytheistic means, right? Poly, many, and theistic, God. Right? So let me just put that here. Many gods. I just put two examples of gods that were important. So Kinicha Ajao, sun god, and then Shak, rain god. So now this Shak is this way in some texts, but it's also seen as this way, CHAC. The spelling, and he's also the storm god. Right? Now, many gods, but other religions also have many gods. Like if you think of Hinduism, for example, right? The Mayan take this to a whole new level because there is a different god. They have a pantheon of gods, right? Many. There's actually one for each day of the year, right? So there are a lot of them, one for each day, right? The religious texts, I mentioned this just now, is Popol Vuh. So this survived. This is one of the few Mayan texts that survived. Again, when the Spaniards came to destroy everything. If someone were really trying to destroy your life, think about it. What would they come after first? Not you, eh? They're not physically harming you. They're just trying to inconvenience you and make your life super difficult to move forward. They might burn your birth paper, your ID card, your driver's license, your banking card, your papers, the things that say, this is who I am, the things that allow you to prove who you are, right? So it's a similar concept, but on a much larger scale. They were trying to destroy people's culture and people's history, right? What language did the Mayans speak? Many different ones at first. And then they would have spoken Spanish after the Spaniards came, right? I will go, I can't go back right this second, but I can go back after, right? Okay, so some of the things that they believed in a creation myth, that the world was created, right? They believed that there were cycles of creation. So the world was created, mankind lived for a certain period of time, and then it was destroyed. And they believed that the world had been recreated 3 different times. Why did they try to destroy their culture? Well, they wanted to make these people into slaves. So if you want people to not fight you, you have to first destroy them mentally. You can't destroy them physically, you need them to work for you. But so you have to destroy them mentally. Right? So they tried to destroy their culture. And also they also probably didn't recognize it as a culture, because they probably only recognize their own culture as culture. The Spaniards did. And if your culture doesn't look like my culture, then it's not culture. It's probably what they were thinking. Class, we should wrap up soon. We will not get through everything we were hoping to today, but we should wrap up soon. Okay. Their religion is also tied to when corn especially, but agriculture, when things should be planted and when things should be reaped, right? So they are both very much connected. Okay, so here's another important belief that they had, animism. So this is a belief that all objects, places, creatures, everything, so things that were around them, if they made they created something out of pottery, with using let me see, a vase, then the vase. If they created an artwork, then the artwork too, right? It had a spiritual essence of some kind, or some kind of soul. The river, the mountain, the trees, some sort of spiritual essence or soul. All right, so questions that I can't answer right now from the chat, I'm making a note and we'll come back to it, right? So marriage practices, we'll come back to that next week, right? All right, why 3 cycles? I'll try to come back to that next week. Okay. Now, who administered the religion? So I'm going to just clear off these little writings, right? Who administered the religion? The priests. So the priests were obviously in the highest class of society. They worked with the Mayan calendar. And then the other thing they did was they would observe stars. So astronomy in Mayan culture is very important, studying the movements of the stars and the planets. So at the top of the pyramids, the temple, they're often observatories, right? They should probably say pyramid, sorry, and not tower, right? And that is so they could look at stars and planets and how they're moving and figure out when they should plant, when a ceremony should be held, when they should harvest, when a sacrifice should be made, and so on, right? All right, so we're doing religion. So here are some other things that priests were responsible for. They were the ones who controlled who learned what. Were the priests higher in class than kings? No, they were right under them. And the king himself is sometimes described as a priest king in textbooks because he is seen as descended from a god, right? So if he's descended from a god, then he also could be a priest. There could be rituals in which God speaks directly to him. He practices this thing called divination, right? All right, so the priests are the ones who are controlling who is taught what. They say who is taught what. They say what ritual needs to be performed. They say when should the festival be, what should be planted, what are the ceremonies to engage in, what events need to take place for the society to flourish, right? They also engage in divination. Have you all seen this word before? It's such a strange word, divination. All right. So this is, anybody has an idea of what it means? So some of us have seen it and some of us have not, but you recognize divine. Oh, Harry Potter. Okay, yes. In Harry Potter, what is divination class for? To see the prophecies, right? And that is what divination is in a way. It's when the divine speaks to someone. When God speaks to the priest or maybe the king. Those are the only 2 classes of society he could speak to in Mayan civilization, right? So the word is used in different ways, but in the context of religion, it's the idea that that is when God speaks to somebody who is human. Right, so it could be that you see your future. It could be that they tell you something that's going to happen. Well, most likely that's why God would be talking to a person, right? But the priests are the ones who are responsible for that. Now, other cultures, other religions have this too. In some religions, it might happen differently. Like people might meditate and then God would speak to them. Or people might catch the spirit, and then that is because that is God speaking to them, right? Right. So divination is the effort of the priest trying to speak directly to God to find out when society should do something, what do people need. All right, so in 4 minutes, we're going to wrap up wherever we are in the PowerPoint, right? Yes, Christianity has it too. All right, but priests, what else did priests do? Priests also would have helped manage cures for certain diseases. Priests were the ones who knew how to write and were responsible for genealogies, meaning histories, right? So they helped to record Mayan culture on paper. They used the bark of fig trees to make a type of paper to write on. And then also on stone monuments called stelae. So I'll come back to that next week so we can make sure we grasp it, right? And then the other thing that they were responsible for is human sacrifice. So they were the ones with some help who would take the victim up, actually do the sacrificing, and any rituals that they had to do after. The society, Mayan society, did in fact use hieroglyphics, Priya, right? So that is how they wrote, with hieroglyphics. We will look at some examples as well. All right, let's see what's on next slide. Anybody still needs to screenshot this also? I know somebody wanted me to go back. Yes, like picture words. You'll ask me again. Let me just see what's on the next thing. All right, this is a long slide that we should probably look at when we're fresh. So let me just look at what we would have had to do that we didn't finish, right? So we still have political organization to talk about, right? So what are the different political roles in the society? And then after we do that on the right side here, I want to just do a chart together, like a flow diagram. So what you could do is for homework, the 3 slides that we didn't get to make notes from, you could go back through the recording, pause it here, and take the notes from 1 to 7, right? So when we come back to discuss, it will go faster next time, right? Then the next slide we didn't get to is this question from 2007. Explain the way in which Mayan civilization showed evidence of great intellectual ability and engineering skills. So these are the general points, and then we would have to go into detail explaining some things about them, right? So we will come back and discuss this, but you could also think about it. All right. And then we have this question. Explain the relationship between the main art forms and beliefs and technology of the Mayan. Right now we have several points under here. Okay, so for homework, you can come back through with the recording to these 3 slides that we didn't get to discuss and just make a note of them. So when we discuss them next week, you'll at least be able to move a little faster because you'll have already taken down the notes, right? All right, and if you are screenshotting, and this might be faster. All right, so here are some links. Let me just put these in the chat, right? Okay, this is not letting me copy. I need to go back. Right, so I will go back to wherever anybody wants for screenshots afterwards, right? Let me just put this in the chat. So you could take your time. So the first one is the Bering Strait picture that you could go back to and look at on your own time if it was confusing to you and you're still trying to make sense of what we were looking at. The second thing is Mayan civilizations, where to find them. Oh no, a timeline, right? This is actually a neat timeline we didn't get to look at. Mayan achievements, which we didn't get to in detail. We will get to next week. And then the video overview that I was looking at earlier, right? So homework, revise, watch the video, complete any notes that you need to. Click on the links posted in the description to explore a little bit more. And then at the start of class next week, we will have a little quiz, short. And then we will go back through and discuss the 3 slides we didn't get to, and we will start the tie notes and calendars, right? All right. Now I can go back to slides that people did not complete before, if you would like to screenshot it, right? So once you have the homework noted, okay, so a reminder, right, that the recording is going to be posted tomorrow. And to get the recording, you go to iLoveLessons.com and put it in the chat, and you look for summer recordings. All right, so to get the recording, go there. When a Mayan died, what happened? They buried him under the house with food and jade and other essentials to help him in the afterlife. But yes, under the house. Right. So If you have homework and you don't have any other questions, you're free to go, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. This was a really fun class. You all had really interesting and fun questions. I'm looking forward to next week, right? All right. And for those of you who need me to go back to a slide for you to screenshot, you could tell me again, please, in the chat, and I'll go now. I'm watching the chat to know where to go to. Gender roles. Okay, so I'm going to go to gender roles. Let me stop the recording. This is not it. Let me get, all right, here's gender roles.